The roar of 50,000 voices shook the stone colossus, a living thunder inside the Flavian amphitheatre. The year was 80 CE, and Rome was celebrating the grand opening of the Colosseum under Emperor Titus. Marble gleamed, awnings fluttered, and the very air trembled with anticipation. But behind the polished pageantry lurked something darker, ancient Rome's most brutal and inhumane arena spectacles that went too far. These were not the heroic duels of popular imagination. They were carefully orchestrated theatres of cruelty, designed to test the limits of human endurance and to feed an empire's unquenchable appetite for blood. From the very start, gladiatorial combat had a ritualistic undertone. In the early Republic, the practice began as funerary rites, armed men fighting to honour the dead, their spilled blood believed to appease the spirits. Yet by the 1st century CE, Rome had twisted this custom into industrial-scale slaughter. Did you know that some festivals ran for weeks, with hundreds of men, and sometimes even women, forced into combat wave after wave until exhaustion and death choked the sands? What had once been solemn ritual was transformed into mechanized entertainment, a spectacle too vast to comprehend without witnessing the rivers of gore that flowed beneath the stands. The empire's emperors understood that the masses could be controlled not just by bread but by blood. Panem et circenses, bread and circuses, was the governing principle. Gladiatorial games were the ultimate expression of this philosophy. What better way to display Rome's power than by summoning men from every conquered province? Gauls, Thracians, Dacians, Syrians, and forcing them to fight for survival before cheering citizens who had once feared them as enemies. These were not mere matches. They were the empire's conquests replayed in miniature, a public reminder that Rome could conquer and kill at will. Consider the day-long programs of the Colosseum. Morning brought the venations, wild beast hunts. Exotic animals captured in Africa or Asia were paraded out. Lions, panthers, elephants, even crocodiles, hunted by gladiators in theatrical displays of dominance. But sometimes the script was reversed. Unarmed prisoners were thrown naked into the arena, their screams drowned by the crowd's delight as leopards leapt onto their backs. A soldier once recorded how a young Nubian boy begged for water, only to be mauled as the crowd demanded more. These were not random events. They were staged, carefully choreographed nightmares, all in the name of entertainment. By midday, the Venetians gave way to the executions. Criminals, deserters, and slaves were dispatched in grotesque performances. A condemned man might be forced to play the role of Orpheus, strumming a lyre as wild beasts were unleashed, his screams replacing song. Another might be cast as Icarus, pushed from a high platform to break on the ground below. These macabre reenactments blurred the line between mythology and massacre, turning death into theatre. Then came the climax, the gladiatorial duels. Heavily armed mummios clashed with nimble retiarii armed only with nets and tridents, their battles resembling desperate dances of life and death. The outcome was not always predetermined, yet the crowd's thirst dictated much. A fighter on his knees, raising a finger in plea, awaited the emperor's verdict. The infamous pollis verso, thumb turned, decided whether the blade should be spared or driven into the exposed throat. Did you know that scholars still debate the gesture, whether it was a thumb up, thumb down, or hidden in a fist? Whatever the truth, one motion of a ruler's hand sealed destinies in the blink of an eye. But the games did not always obey even the thin veneer of fairness. Some emperors transformed them into displays of cruelty beyond imagination. Emperor Commodus, son of Marcus Aurelius, entered the arena himself, demanding to be worshipped as Hercules reborn. He slaughtered animals and crippled men not for contest but for humiliation, binding them, forcing them to fight with wooden swords while he struck with steel. His vanity turned the Colosseum into a mirror of his madness, a stage upon which he enacted fantasies of invincibility. For the audience, it was shocking, but irresistible. They had never before seen an emperor descend into the blood-stained sand. The human cost was staggering. Behind the glamour of polished armour and gilded helmets lay thousands of broken lives. Gladiators were often slaves, criminals, or prisoners of war, branded with the stigma of infamia. They were stripped of legal rights, denied family names, reduced to property. Yet the paradox remained. They could achieve fame, adulation, and wealth if they survived long enough. Some gladiators became legends, their images painted on walls, their names shouted by crowds like modern athletes. Others perished anonymously, their corpses dragged unceremoniously into the spoliarium, a dark chamber beneath the Colosseum where bodies were piled and stripped of valuables before being dumped into mass graves. One chilling fact: in the inaugural games of the Colosseum alone, over 9,000 animals and thousands of men were slaughtered in 100 days of carnage. Imagine the stench of blood baking under the Mediterranean sun, the cries of widows outside the gates, the silence of children who had watched fathers led away in chains. The scale was beyond comprehension. It was not sport, it was systemic brutality, state-sponsored and endlessly repeated. And still the people came. Why? Perhaps because the games promised more than death. They promised catharsis. They allowed citizens to project fears onto the condemned, to revel in the Empire's victories, to feel the rush of life by watching others lose theirs. Yet even in the stands, unease lingered. Writers like Seneca condemned the cruelty, warning that such spectacles corrupted the soul. Others, like Juvenal, sneered at the people's obsession, mocking how they abandoned politics and reason for bread and blood. The greatest irony lay in the duality of Roman civilization. This was a society of law, engineering, and philosophy, a people who built aqueducts, codified rites, and debated stoic virtue. Yet within the same walls, they turned mass killing into pageantry. The games were Rome distilled, brilliant and barbaric, ordered and savage, rational and insane. Each cheer for blood echoed the contradiction at the heart of the empire. As the sun set on a day's games, the arena floor would be raked, bodies removed, and the sand freshened for the next day. But the memories lingered. The sight of a mother fainting as her son was torn apart. The laughter of nobles as a condemned thief's body was split by an elephant's foot. The quiet horror in the eyes of a gladiator who knew tomorrow would be his last dawn. This was no mere entertainment. It was Rome bearing its soul, stripped of marble and rhetoric, revealing an empire that defined itself not only by conquest abroad, but by cruelty at home. And in that cruelty, the games crossed a line that even Rome, in its hunger for spectacle, sometimes feared it had gone too far. The midday sun over Rome was merciless. The Colosseum's awnings stretched like giant sails above the crowd, offering a veil of shade, yet no fabric could soften the brutality that was about to unfold. Morning hunts had thrilled them, lions gutted, elephants pierced, prisoners mauled. But now came the centerpiece of Rome's cruelty, executions designed not simply to kill, but to entertain. In these spectacles, punishment became performance, law became theatre, and death itself was choreographed as art. Condemned criminals, deserters, rebels, and slaves were forced into roles they never chose. The Romans called them noxi, the guilty ones. But guilt was often just a matter of status. A runaway slave could be branded guilty. A captured rebel could be branded guilty. A Christian refusing to sacrifice to the emperor's gods could be branded guilty. Once labelled, they were stripped of humanity, reduced to props in the empire's stage play of vengeance. The executions took many forms, each more creative than the last. Crucifixion, once the emblem of Rome's authority along the roadsides, became a staged act in the arena. Did you know that during certain festivals, dozens of men were crucified together in orchestrated displays, their bodies forming grim tableaux against painted backdrops? Imagine the cries of agony rising like a chorus, echoing through the arches as children in the stands pointed. Mothers whispered prayers, and noblemen laughed. The condemned were not just killed, they were displayed, broken slowly, every breath, another reminder of Rome's absolute power. Other executions drew from myth. A man condemned as Orpheus would enter dressed in robes, carrying a lyre, pretending to charm animals. Then, suddenly, wild beasts would be released. Lions, hungry from days of starvation, would tear him limb from limb, while the crowd cheered the end of Orpheus. Another might play Prometheus, chained before the audience, his flesh ripped open by a bear or eagle trained to strike. These reenactments blurred the line between fable and flesh. For Romans, it was entertainment. For the condemned, it was the cruelest parody of culture, their deaths disguised as literature. One of the most infamous forms was the damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. Prisoners were cast naked into the arena, sometimes in groups, to face packs of lions, tigers, or leopards. Some were bound to stakes, left helpless as animals circled closer with snarls and roars. Others were forced to run, stumbling in terror across the sand while the crowd jeered. A soldier might slash at their heels to keep the spectacle going, prolonging their torment. Did you know that even women and children were sometimes subjected to this horror? Ancient texts record mothers clinging to their infants as leopards leapt upon them, an image so cruel that even hardened spectators shuddered. Yet the games continued, for cruelty itself had become the currency of spectacle. The logistics were staggering. Thousands of animals had to be imported from the farthest reaches of the empire. North African lions, Syrian leopards, Indian elephants. Merchants, trappers, and hunters risked their lives capturing them, shipping them across deserts and seas to feed Rome's insatiable hunger for blood. The cost was immense, but emperors paid gladly. To them, each beast was an investment in their popularity. An emperor who gave the people blood was loved, if only for a time. An emperor who withheld it risked rebellion. Consider Emperor Trajan's games celebrating his victory over Dacia in 107 CE. Over 4 months, thousands of captives and criminals were executed in endless cycles of horror. Prisoners of war, once proud warriors of Dacia, were reduced to playthings. Some were forced to reenact the battles they had lost, only this time with real blades that guaranteed their deaths. Others were made to fight against animals while chained, their courage mocked, their bodies devoured. By the end, Rome had celebrated its conquest not only with military triumph, but with an orgy of death, staged for every citizen to consume. These spectacles carried political weight. Executions were not only punishments, they were propaganda. A rebel crucified in the arena reminded the crowd that Rome crushed insurrection without mercy. A Christian torn apart by beasts reminded them that refusal to honour the gods was treason. In every execution, the empire staged its authority, turning fear into a shared ritual. Did you know that some emperors timed executions to coincide with significant dates, like victories in war or imperial birthdays, ensuring that the symbolism of power was inescapable? Every lash, every scream, every severed limb spoke the same message: Rome rules. And yet, beneath the roar of approval, whispers of unease grew. Philosophers and writers criticized the brutality, fearing it corrupted the soul of Rome. Seneca wrote of men who came to the arena and left more savage than they had entered, having cheered the butchery of strangers. Tertullian, a Christian writer, condemned the games outright, calling them schools of cruelty. "See how they die," he wrote, describing the Christians in the arena, "and you will see the difference between us and you." The condemned refused to plead, embracing death as testimony to their faith. Their calm defiance unsettled the crowds, who came to laugh but instead glimpsed an unsettling dignity. For the condemned themselves, the moments before execution were filled with terror. Imagine a young Thracian slave, dragged into the arena, his wrists bound with iron, staring at the sand that would drink his blood. His eyes search the stands for someone, anyone who might pity him. None do. Instead, a noblewoman points at him, urging the guards to begin. The gate creaks open. The growl of a lion fills the air. His knees buckle, but the soldiers prod him forward. The crowd roars, not in grief but in hunger for the spectacle. His death is not his own. It belongs to Rome. Sometimes the cruelty turned almost absurd. Records tell of prisoners sewn into animal skins, goat, wolf, or bear, then thrown to dogs trained to attack. Others were made to fight each other with no weapons, torn apart by desperation while the guards laughed. There were even instances where criminals were burned alive in the arena, their bodies set alight like living torches, echoing the fate of Prometheus or Hercules on his pyre. Each method was chosen not only for efficiency, but for artistry, a grotesque creativity in the art of killing. But why did the crowd love it? Perhaps it was fear disguised as fascination. By watching others die, Romans reassured themselves of their own safety, their own power. Perhaps it was curiosity, a hunger for spectacle in a world without cinema or screens. Perhaps it was the darkest side of human nature, given permission to feast openly. Whatever the reason, the arena fed something primal, something insatiable. As centuries passed, the brutality did not fade. In fact, it intensified. The Colosseum became a machine of death, perfected with trapdoors, pulleys, and stagecraft. Prisoners could be hoisted suddenly into view, beasts released from hidden chambers, elaborate sets constructed for mythological executions. Rome had created not just a killing ground, but a theatre of cruelty, a stage on which death itself was the star. And yet, in the silence after the crowd dispersed, the arena floor told another story. Blood pooled in the sand, torn bodies lay still. Workers dragged corpses into the spoliarium, their names forgotten, their cries still echoing in the arches. The spectacle ended, but the suffering remained. This was the true face of Rome, a civilization that built aqueducts and temples, that debated law and philosophy, that crafted art and poetry, and that also turned human lives into disposable props for entertainment. The executions in the Colosseum revealed an empire willing to sacrifice its humanity for spectacle, to trade dignity for applause, to sanctify cruelty as culture. And as the last rays of sun burned across the arena, one truth lingered, a truth as haunting now as it was then. The line between justice and theatre, between order and savagery, between humanity and horror, was not just blurred in Rome, it was erased. Rome may have fallen, but the echo of those screams still reminds us that when cruelty becomes entertainment, civilization itself begins to rot from within. And so the sand of the arena whispers across time, a society is revealed not in its triumphs, but in the way it kills the power.